Hello, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhnio. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and I invite all of you to watch this latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of September the 16th. So please join, watch this video, like it, of course. Leave your comments just below the video, and don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Let's make some overall overview of the situation on the front line, and then move on to some detailed locations on where actually full-scale war in Ukraine is going on.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
As always, we use the deep state resource to analyze everything happening on the front line. And don't forget, let me remind you again to subscribe. Let's start with a general overview of the situation, of what's happening. There's a persistent impression that the enemy has started to lose their offensive momentum. A persistent impression, I repeat, of this kind. They're losing their offensive momentum because, in fact, the period from May to July was the worst for the defense forces. During May to July, there were months when the enemy advanced by 500 square kilometers each month. Then in August, every 2 weeks, the advance was about 150 to 200 square kilometers. Now, based on the results of the first 2 weeks of September, this pace has dropped even further, and the enemy has advanced by 100 square kilometers. That's not much, but honestly, it's the least so far. However, this demonstrates a sharp decline, a sharp drop in this intensity, and this sharp decline is in no way related to weather conditions, because they haven't changed drastically or worsened to the extent that we could say the infantry can't advance. Most likely, we are now beginning to see certain results of the coordinated actions of the Corps that have entered their areas of responsibility, meaning a more coordinated defense. And by the way, within this coordination, it is probably worth taking into account that yesterday we learned about some initial personnel changes within the Corps. Yesterday, it became known that Commander-in-Chief Syrski, this did not happen yesterday, but it became known yesterday, dismissed 2 Corps commanders of the 20th and 17th Corps. The 20th Corps is actually the Novopavlivka direction, where, in fact, we currently have rather unpleasant results, where the Russians are advancing in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Colonel Kitugin was in charge of this corps there, and the 17th Corps commander, the head of the 17th Corps, Volodymyr Silenko, he was responsible, and this corps is positioned in the Zaporizhia direction. This is, in fact, where the Russians are now pushing towards Stepnohirsk along the so-called Pridniprovska section. It is in these 2 directions where probably our situation is the worst, except, as I see it, for Lyman. That is where these changes were made. The commanders of these 2 corps, the 17th and the 20th, were dismissed there. This is the news that became known yesterday. Accordingly, what I'm getting at is that overall the corps system has quite likely started to prove itself now. The quality of command in the troops has improved, and as a result, so has the defense. It is likely, quite likely, that the enemy's reserves, as expected, are not limitless, and little by little, they have started to become depleted. But there's no need to rush into some kind of euphoric forward just yet. After all, the enemy will still have decisive battles for Donbas, particularly at the operational tactical level. And clearly, very serious fighting is expected for the Pokrovsk sector of the front. It's not for nothing that elite units of the Russian naval infantry have been deployed here. But we'll start with this direction because we have good news about it. So Pokrovsk and rather Dobropillia. Yesterday it was officially announced, though it didn't happen yesterday, but it was officially reported yesterday, about the liberation of the settlement of Pankivka. Pankivka, along with the surrounding areas in the Dobropillia direction of Donetsk region, was liberated. It's about 18 kilometers from Dobropillia and 25 from Pokrovsk itself. The soldiers of the 225th Assault Regiment, operating in the area of responsibility of the 1st Corps of the Azov National Guard, carried out this liberation. The assault troops of the 225th 225, who are also operating successfully in the Sumy region. Just yesterday, I reported on their successful actions in the Sumy region, advancing toward the state border. They are now working just as successfully in the Donetsk region, driving out the enemy here as well. Pankivka has been liberated, and in fact, we now see that the occupiers find themselves in a rather trivial situation at their breakthrough point of this march push into Donbas. Moreover, Ukrainian forces are pressing even deeper, so to speak, pushing the Russians further within their breakthrough zone, significantly deeper. This pressure is taking place here in Razin and Novotoretsk, aiming to cut them off completely along the Kazeni-Toretsk River, which flows right here. The goal is to try to cut off the Russian breakthrough here, to eliminate their entire presence on the right bank, the western bank of this river, to try to cut off all of their presence there. As of now, the fiercest fighting is taking place for the settlement of Rodinske. As of now, in Novoekonomikne, the enemy has been virtually driven out from the entire western bank of the Kazeni-Toretsk River. But it is still too early and premature to say that we can expect significant successes here. At the moment, very intense fighting is ongoing with a great deal of, caution, and there's this Russian word, opaska, caution. With such prudence and, caution, let's use that word, our fighters say, whether they are from the assault troops or the Azov National Guard Corps, they're not rushing headlong into danger, but they are sharing information about what's happening here with great care and precision. And here we really do have successes. This is to the north of Pokrovsk. To the south of Pokrovsk, unfortunately, we have a very difficult situation in terms of the fact that the enemy has managed to advance recently, both in Udakne and in Kotlin. We are especially talking about Udakne. The situation here is difficult because, as you can see, half of the settlement is in the red zone and the other half is in the gray zone. And overall, things for us here are not very good. There is a whole lot of gray zone. And we remember that these two settlements are holding back the enemy from breaking through into the operational space, which would allow them to advance further toward the road that would cut Pokrovsk off from Pavlohrad, which of course must not be allowed to happen. South of Pokrovsk, the enemy is already essentially present on the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk. But this is not a situation that developed just yesterday. It has been forming over a long period of time. But overall, near Pokrovsk, given that a decisive battle is being prepared, it has been possible to create certain rather positive conditions for the defense of this settlement, the entire agglomeration, ahead of the autumn battles for the city, for the Pokrovsk-Mirnohrad agglomeration. Now, in the Dnipropetrovsk region, we have much bigger problems here. There is a settlement here called Pokrovska, not to be confused with Pokrovsk. Pokrovska is here. This is Dnipropetrovsk region. It is precisely towards Pokrovska that the occupiers have turned their attention, so to speak, along the river. It is here that they have occupied the latest settlements, Novoselivka, Sosnivka, and Vorone. And here they are advancing in this area. It is here that the 20th Army Corps is operating, whose commander was recently dismissed, as I had reported earlier. I don't know all the reasons. I don't know what it's connected to. I don't know whether the commander here had the circumstances and opportunities to somehow improve our defensive capabilities, or whether those opportunities and resources, which is most important, were simply not available. But the fact remains that, unfortunately for now, we are unable to completely halt the enemy's advance here. We have managed to significantly slow it down, but to stop it entirely, as we can see with the breakthrough near Dobropillia, that has not been possible. Near Zaporizhzhia, or more precisely, not right by Zaporizhzhia, but in the Zaporizhzhia direction, in the area of Plavny, Primorske, in the region where the enemy is trying to capture Stepnohirsk. There are many sections of gray zone here. In a broader sense, the defense of Stepnohirsk is holding. The enemy is being kept at bay. But overall, the situation here is quite changeable and difficult. Perhaps not everything is going well with the defense, not everything is going well with the command, and maybe that's precisely why the commander of the 17th Army Corps was also replaced, which, I repeat, became known yesterday. Let's move from here, from the south to the north, to Kupiansk, where we've also had some interesting news recently. Interesting in the sense that the Russians have been carrying out those so-called notorious pipe wars episodes here, when they advanced using pipes. In this particular case, these were gas pipes, part of the gas network, which they used to advance to the northwest of the city, and from there, from the forests near the settlement of Radkivka. After that, the Russians gained the opportunity to enter the settlement of Kupiansk, specifically its northern outskirts. As of now, Russian troops are already present in Kupiansk itself. This is neither a secret nor news. They are being resisted. All these episodes of the pipe wars now need to be eliminated. And those isolated groups of Russian troops that made it there, the Russian assault units, they need to be eliminated. This in particular can be seen in the video, where soldiers of the 116th Mechanized Brigade are engaged in this work. Here is their video published by the Black Wing unit, which appeared on social media yesterday demonstrating this work. It's actually very difficult now to drive them out from within the settlement itself. This involves work in basements, schools, houses where the Russians are entrenched. The main thing the Russians are trying to do is to take control of the heights, and not just the natural elevations, but the physical heights. They are trying to occupy 9-story buildings in the city of Kupiansk. Why do they need this? So they can effectively set up the crucial firing positions for UAV operators right there, and then start terrorizing all our surrounding areas everywhere. Plus, the significant lack of mandatory evacuation from this particular area, unfortunately, doesn't help the situation at all. In general, there are a lot of questions for the civil administrations in this regard, and not just for the civil administrations, but let's say for the military political leadership, the parliament, and the government. In the 4th year of the war, I understand that this is, well, a very complicated issue when it comes to forced relocation. But people who live in areas of active hostilities are a very serious burden for the military. And in many cases, they are also collaborators. That's the absolute truth. I'm not labeling everyone that way, but it does happen. Now we will move to the Lyman direction, to the settlement of Yampil. Unfortunately, I know of specific cases where my friends and acquaintances lost a lot because local residents gave away their positions. 2 cars, 1 motorcycle, a generator, an EcoFlow. Well, in short, I won't list everything. A lot was lost because locals gave away their positions, and those locals are still basically on the front line. Why are they still there? Why don't they evacuate? Of course, I don't have the right to judge all the people who remain in the occupied territories. And this is a question for the government. Where are you relocating them if we're talking about resettlement? This is a very serious question. But the fact that it hasn't been resolved in the 4th year of the war, the fact that we don't have a regulatory framework, this is a big question for the members of parliament as well. There are no such legislative acts, and the Russians are taking advantage of this. The Russians are targeting this issue, particularly in Kupiansk. For example, they occupy the same 9-story buildings. This was previously reported by Deep State. So, for example, they occupy a 9-story building, and in this building, there are still people living there who haven't evacuated from Kupiansk. And what are the defense forces supposed to do? They can't strike that building while there are civilians inside, can they? Moreover, the Russians disguise themselves as civilians. They've simply figured out these weaknesses of ours, and they're trying to exploit them. Now, try to identify who is a civilian. Is this a civilian or is it a Russian, especially if there are still civilians left there? It's just absurd. These are simply extremely complicated conditions being created for our defense forces, and the Russians, not hesitating at all, are taking advantage of this. Unfortunately, these are very serious problems that are being created in this regard, and they can also be seen in Kupiansk. In the context of those so-called pipe wars, yesterday I spoke with the commander of the 429th Achilles Unmanned Systems Regiment, actually with Achilles himself, Yuri Fedorenko, who said that right now there is a request, one could even say a demand, from the military to the Kharkiv military administration. This request is about, and I think it should be addressed not only to the Kharkiv administration, but also to all those administrations that have the resources and understand where, in which areas there are such engineering structures in the form of large wide pipes through which the Russians can infiltrate into the rear of our troops along the current line of contact. Because there are such industrial facilities in eastern Ukraine, and there are many of them. A great number of such industrial facilities were built during the Soviet Union in the areas of Lysychansk, Sievierodonetsk, Kupiansk, Chasiv Yar, Pokrovsk, Avdiivka, and so on. You could list a lot of these sites. So the fact that they were built during the Soviet Union, what does that mean? It means that the maps, plans, and blueprints of these constructions, where are they? They're in the archives in Moscow. The occupiers know all these pipelines perfectly well. They, like worms, they're not afraid to crawl through them. They crawl, sneak behind our troops, set up ambushes, disguise themselves as civilians, and cause problems. Then try to smoke them out of Kupiansk to find out which houses, which specific apartments they're hiding in, where they've set up their positions, their nests. It's actually very difficult work. This creates terrible chaos within our defenses, which, as I mentioned at the beginning, had been established quite clearly and steadfastly. Accordingly, what Achilles told me is that right now there is a request from the military to the civil military administrations for officials to take responsibility and dismantle, for example, sections of gas pipelines or main pipelines that used to connect us with the Russian Federation, but are no longer in use, obviously, and to dismantle those sections in areas where potential combat operations may take place, where it is currently possible to do so. This is to secure against similar advances by Russian troops into our rear in the future. as happened during the attempt in Sudzha, as it was in Avdiivka, and as these attempts were made and successfully carried out in Kupiansk. Such measures are taken to secure, prevent, dismantle in advance, cut, disconnect, put into responsible storage, redirect all these pipes somewhere, and then reassemble them later. Yes, this creates serious problems for the residents of the frontline areas who are literally right on the front line. This quite possibly deprives them of gas supply. But again, this raises the issue of the need for evacuation, the need to create shelters deeper within Ukrainian territory. What about the government? The government, which submitted the budget yesterday, how does it plan for this? What funding is allocated for it? So here you see there is a huge humanitarian tangle of these problems, but this needs to be done because otherwise our troops are left powerless against this. What can you do against a worm that crawls underground? What can you do? How can you organize a defense? And this is not actually a complaint against the military. That's why officials also need to start taking responsibility for such things, because we're talking about the lives of our servicemen in these situations. And well, I promised that we would also move on to the Lyman direction, the settlement of Yampil. Here, just yesterday, Deep State literally showed the advance of Russian troops, or rather the expansion of the gray zone towards Yampil. In reality, the enemy is already moving around in Yampil. This situation didn't just start yesterday. It has a bit of a longer history. It's been going on, and the enemy is moving around disguised in civilian clothes. My contacts among the soldiers holding the defense there have also informed me about this. Here you can see footage from Deep State, where Russians disguised in civilian clothes are walking around with assault rifles. It's good when you can spot them like that, well, with a rifle. Then you can be sure that it's a Russian, not a civilian resident. But in general, they don't really care about violating the Geneva or whatever other rules. Who even knows what rules anymore? There are no rules left in this war anymore. No one follows anything at all anymore. Right now, the Russians have rushed into Yampil and they're being chased around there. I know for sure they're being chased. And there was an official statement from the 11th Army Corps, which is holding the defense there, saying that a set of measures was carried out during which the enemy was detected, blocked, and in some places neutralized. They're just being chased there like rats, being killed and driven out of the houses where they've been hiding. Right now, basically, ambushes are the main tactic the enemy is using to carry out this kind of, let's say, sabotage activity. Ambushes, ambushes, ambushes. And they hide behind civilians, sometimes even dressing up as civilians themselves. And from these ambushes, they then create problems for the defense forces of our country. In some cases, among the civilians, as I already mentioned, there are also collaborators. In particular, regarding the case in Yampil, unfortunately, I'm aware of such a case. As for Yampil itself, the Russians definitely want to capture it. They are determined to take it. It is of great importance. Yampil is essentially a direct open road to Lyman. Lyman is critically important to them in terms of conducting their late autumn-winter campaign in order to capture a major settlement. Lyman has significant influence for further developing their campaign to advance on Sloviansk. And Yampil, in turn, has the ability to influence Siversk, which the Russians have already approached almost point blank. As you can see now, to the right on the map from Siversk, there is a huge gray area in Serebryanka and Verkhnyo-Kamianske. Those untouched borders that had stood for a very long time, but now, unfortunately, the Russians have managed to gradually, little by little, break through them. Well, the situation is not critical, but it is actually very unpleasant given what is happening in the Lyman direction. If we sum it up, perhaps the worst situation we have is in the Lyman direction. Our troops are trying in every possible way to fix it, but unfortunately, due to a long and complex set of various reasons, the situation there has developed exactly as it has. Lyman, Novopavlivka, these are the two directions that cause the most concern, so to speak, and the most caution. Pokrovsk is also potentially a direction of concern because the enemy will definitely continue to deliver very strong and powerful strikes there. That's the situation as of today, September 16th, Tuesday. Thank you, friends, for your attention. Please give us a like and leave your comments. Subscribe to us and stay healthy. All the best. See you next time.